Hey everyone, welcome back. Go ahead, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let the day finally melt away. Tonight, we're drifting far, before kingdoms, before languages, before even the idea of history itself. Back to when warmth was a miracle and darkness had a heartbeat. This isn't really a story about gods or heroes. It's about something smaller, something quieter. A single spark that refused to go out. They called it the Ember that dreamed, which in old tongues was more poetry than literal description, though, like most old myths, everyone pretended it was literal anyway. Because why not? Reality was overrated, and firelight was the best storyteller they had. Now, every culture has a myth about where fire came from. The Greeks had Prometheus, stealing it from the gods. The Hindus spoke of Agni, born from the friction of heaven and earth. The Norse imagined Loki's trickery wrapped in flame. But this one, this obscure, quiet myth, comes from a half-forgotten culture that didn't even name itself. They left no empires, no inscriptions, just shards of pottery, soot-stained stones, and one recurring image, a small glowing ember drawn inside a circle. So, let's begin there, in the middle of nowhere, at the edge of everything. Faint hum of wind, slow crackle of embers. According to the legend, the world was once frozen silence. No sun, no stars, just endless frost and sleeping mountains. Then one night, if night even meant anything, something in the void exhaled. And that breath caught against stone. It smoldered. A spark, tiny and trembling, but alive. That was Arathon. He wasn't born exactly. He just was. Like a sigh that decided to stay warm. The myths describe him as a figure made of glowing ash and dim light, walking barefoot across ice that hissed beneath him. Every step he left behind, a faint warmth, and wherever he lingered, frost melted into water. The first rivers, they said, were his footprints thawed. The first dawn, his yawn. And yes, apparently even cosmic embodiments of warmth get tired. For a long time, Arathon wandered alone. He didn't know where to go. He just knew he couldn't stop moving. Because when he did, the world started freezing again. It was a pretty rough job for someone who technically wasn't even a person. Then one day, or century, who's counting, he found them. The first people. Now, people might be generous. They were closer to shadows than humans. Pale, shivering creatures who huddled in caves and flinched from their own echoes. They didn't speak yet. They just made small sounds, like half-forgotten songs. They feared Arathon at first. He was light, and they were used to dark. But curiosity is older than fear. So one of them, a child according to the story, stepped forward and reached out her hand. Arathon hesitated. He knew what would happen. Touch meant change. But she reached anyway, and when their fingers met, warmth spread through her body. For the first time in human memory, someone didn't shiver. Someone slept without fear of freezing. That was the first gift of fire. Not light, not cooking, not weaponry, just comfort. The feeling of being safe enough to close your eyes. That's the moment, they say, the the world started dreaming. Of course, gifts never come free, because the gods, yes, there were gods, there are always gods, noticed. And as usual, they didn't take kindly to mortals getting cozy without divine permission. The pantheon in this myth was, complicated. Not the glamorous marble deities you see in Greek art. These were more like natural forces wearing moods. There was Nem, the god of cold thought, Isura, the goddess of stillness, and their leader known only as the Hollow One, a being that represented the silence before creation. They weren't evil per se, they just didn't like noise, warmth, or anything remotely lively. So when they saw fire flickering in mortal caves, they sent frost back into the world. The seas froze, mountains cracked, breath turned to glass midair. The people panicked. They begged Arathon for help, but he couldn't fight cold directly. He was warmth, not war. So he did what warmth always does. He spread himself thinner. He broke pieces of his light off and gave them away. Tiny sparks, carried in hollow bones and dry reeds. Those became torches, hearths, and candles. And with each spark he gave, he dimmed a little more. He knew it couldn't last, but apparently that was fine with him, because Arathon didn't believe fire was meant to belong to anyone. It was meant to be shared until it disappeared. A rather inconvenient philosophy for survival, but a beautiful one. Eventually, of course, the gods escalated, because divine egos don't tolerate generosity. They decided to erase Arathon entirely. The myth says they sent the rain first, endless, heavy, choking rain. It drowned the fires, one by one. Then they sent silence. No wind, no crackle, no breath. Even whispers froze midair. The people returned to their caves. Darkness reclaimed the world. But somewhere, deep beneath the earth, in a cave of black stone, a single ember still glowed, too faint to warm, too stubborn to die. That ember was Arathon, dying, but dreaming. And as he dreamed, he remembered everything he'd seen. The laughter of mortals discovering warmth, the glow of their eyes, the way they gathered close, not out of fear, but out of love. And he realized something. Fire was never his to give. It was theirs all along. He had only reminded them how to make it. So in his last breath, Arathon whispered the secret of flame into the earth. Not as words, but as friction. The rubbing of wood against wood, stone against stone. The idea that warmth could be created, not borrowed. Which, when you think about it, is the same thing as faith. Centuries later, when storytellers finally began recording myths, the name Arathon had mostly faded. He'd been absorbed into newer gods, new legends, new pantheons. Prometheus, Agni, Loki, they're all echoes of the same ember. Different tongues, same warmth. But if you listen closely, you can still hear him in the oldest tales. The one who gave everything, not to rule or rebel, but simply to keep others warm. They called him the Wanderer of Flame, the light that walks, the ember that dreamed. Let's linger here for a moment. You can almost imagine it, the faint flicker in total darkness, The smell of smoke on stone, the sound of ancient hands clapping warmth back into existence. There's something soothing about it, isn't it? Knowing that long before writing, before civilization, someone somewhere was huddled around a fire, telling a story about why fire exists at all. And maybe, in a small way, that's what we're doing right now, keeping the ember alive. But, of course, myths evolve, because humans can't leave anything alone. Eventually, priests, kings, and philosophers decided Erathon's story needed rules, doctrine, a moral backbone. So, they added one. They said Erathon didn't simply fade, he ascended. He became the flame
between worlds, an unseen spirit watching every hearth. Each time someone lights a fire, they awaken a piece of him. And every time they let it die, he sleeps again. It's poetic, sure, but there's a quiet irony to it. Erathon spent eternity giving his warmth away, only to become the symbol of ownership, a spirit to be worshipped, controlled, invoked. Humans are excellent at taking selfless acts and turning them into holidays. Let's float gently forward, because this story doesn't end there. Every myth, no matter how ancient, eventually finds a way to reappear. Sometimes as religion, sometimes as art, sometimes as a bedtime story told on a tired evening. Just like this. And as for the ember that dreamed, maybe it's still out there, burning quietly in someone's fireplace, waiting for another sleepless soul to notice the way the light dances and wonder, did it ever stop dreaming?
Hey again. If you're still awake, that's impressive, because we're about to drift even deeper into the myth. Don't worry, nothing dramatic happens here, just a quiet stroll through time and maybe a few burnt gods along the way. So, after Erathon became the flame, or whatever metaphorical afterlife fire spirits get, the world didn't end. It just warmed up a bit. Humanity started treating fire like it was a friend who occasionally bites. You needed it, you feared it, and of course, you started worshiping it, because that's what early humans did with anything vaguely useful and slightly terrifying. Fire became divine, sacred. You couldn't just light it and forget it. Oh no, you had to feed it, talk to it, sometimes even marry it. Which sounds weird now, but back then it was a solid theological investment. Tribes built small shrines where embers from lightning strikes were kept burning for generations, and if the flame ever died, someone got blamed, usually the poor firekeeper who probably just sneezed too hard near the ashes. Now, this wasn't just one culture. The idea of sacred fire pops up everywhere. In Persia, the eternal flames of Atar burned in Zoroastrian temples, guarded, cleaned, and never allowed to fade. In Rome, the Vestal virgins had a similar gig, except theirs came with vows of chastity and some very questionable HR policies. If the sacred fire went out, they could literally be buried alive. So yes, ancient Rome took their fire maintenance seriously. Meanwhile, far in the east, Vedic priests in India tended Agni, the god of fire, messenger of sacrifice, and general cosmic delivery service. Every prayer, every offering, had to pass through him. Imagine being the divine post office for an entire civilization. No wonder Agni is always described as exhausted. But back to our Ember, our Erathon. As story spread and blended, he started changing. In some versions, he was no longer a wandering teacher, but a fallen star. In others, a god's rebellious servant who stole fire to give to mortals. Yes, that story again. Prometheus, Loki, Maui, they all wore Erathon's shadow eventually. Different names, same spark. You can see it happen across time. One myth hands the torch, literally, to another. The details morph, but the rhythm stays. Someone steals the fire, someone gets punished, and humanity keeps the light. It's oddly comforting, isn't it, to think that across tens of thousands of years, from cave paintings to cathedrals, we kept telling the same bedtime story about warmth, creation, and consequence. As centuries drifted by, fire stopped being divine and started being domestic. You could find it in kitchens, in forges, in lamps. The gods, it seemed, had retired from flame keeping. Mortals took over. And once we could control fire, we decided to control everything else. Cue civilization. The first cities were built where fire and water met. Riverbanks and hearths, workshops and altars. We began melting rock, shaping metal, baking clay into memory. The ember that once dreamed of being the sun was now trapped inside ovens, torches, and bronze spears. And here's where it gets poetic, or tragic, depending on your mood. The same element that once meant warmth and hope eventually became the tool of conquest. Fire no longer connected us to gods. It powered empires. There's a strange irony in that. Humanity's greatest act of devotion became its first act of domination. But even through conquest and chaos, the myths survived, hiding in folk tales, whispered by grandmothers to children before sleep. "Don't let the flame go out," they'd say. "Keep the hearth warm." They weren't just talking about flames. They meant love, memory, continuity. Every hearth became a reminder of Erathon or Prometheus or whoever your local myth preferred, that the warmth we carry isn't just physical. It's the piece of light we refuse to let the gods take back. And so, while kingdoms burned and empires rose, a single ember glowed on, passed from campfire to candle, from forge to filament. Let's float a little further now, into the age when that ember turned electric, when humanity, bored of sparks and smoke, decided that fire needed an upgrade.
Hey again, still here? That's either dedication or insomnia. Either way, welcome back. Tonight the fire gets smarter. Sort of. See, for most of history, humanity's relationship with fire was pretty straightforward. It burned stuff, and we tried not to be one of those things. But somewhere around the 18th century, that began to change. We started to realize that fire wasn't just heat, it was energy, power, a spark we could shape, direct, and, occasionally, blow up entire labs with. You can thank a few obsessive tinkerers for that. People like James Watt, who looked at a boiling kettle and thought, what if this made boats move? Or Benjamin Franklin, who stared at lightning and decided to flirt with electrocution for the sake of curiosity, because apparently curiosity was worth dying for. Electricity, the invisible cousin of fire, started humbly. Just some static shocks, amber rods, and confused philosophers rubbing things together in the dark. But once we figured out that lightning could be tamed, the world changed faster than any myth before it. We built wires, we built bulbs, we built entire cities that glowed all night long, a permanent sunrise. Fire had learned to think. Imagine being one of the old gods watching from wherever retired deities hang out. You've spent millennia making humans beg for sunlight, and suddenly they're building it in glass. They've got light that doesn't die, heat that doesn't smoke, and fire that obeys a switch. Divine status revoked. But the irony is, even with all that, we never really let go of the ember. Every electric glow is still just fire in disguise. Same spark, different outfit. By the time Edison and Tesla were dueling over currents, one selling dreams, the other chasing lightning, fire had gone corporate. Factories burned with steam engines, smokestacks coughed clouds into the sky, and cities began to look like constellations flipped upside down. For the first time in history, humans didn't fear the dark, they created it. Not the absence of light, but the pollution of it, a constant buzzing brightness that made the stars fade. Funny, isn't it? We spent thousands of years worshiping fire for chasing away the night, and then we used it to erase the night entirely. Typical human move. But under the hum of neon and steel, the old ember still glows, that need to feel warmth, to create meaning out of flame. The same spark that once danced in Arathon's hands now flickers in every light bulb, every screen, every thought that says, I can make this burn brighter. There's an odd tenderness to it. We've tamed lightning, yes, but also absorbed it. The electricity flowing through the world is now flowing through us. The neurons in your brain, tiny arcs of bioelectric fire. Every thought, every dream, every memory, just sparks. So when people say humanity is made of stardust, that's not just poetic fluff. It's literally true. The elements that burn in the heart of stars are the same ones that flicker in ours. We're walking embers of the cosmos, pretending to be civilized. And yet, even as our fire evolved into circuits and data, it still carries the same mythic weight. The stories didn't vanish, they updated. Prometheus became Frankenstein. Arathon became AI. We keep creating new versions of the same story, the spark that disobeys, the creation that learns too much, the light that both saves and destroys. It's almost comforting how predictable we are. We can't stop lighting things on fire, metaphorically, technologically, emotionally. It's what we do best. So, as the modern age hums softly around us, full of glowing screens and whispering wires, it's worth remembering that this is all the same ancient story. The fire never stopped dreaming. It just learned how to think. Let's drift now into the quiet aftermath, into an age where the flame isn't outside of us anymore. It's inside.
Hey again, wanderer of the timeline. Still awake? Or maybe half asleep by now, which is fine. That's kind of the point. Tonight, we're turning the flame inward. Not the kind that burns forests or lights cities. The quieter kind. The one that hums behind your ribs and makes you wonder why people in the past were both geniuses and absolute disasters. You see, once humans stopped fighting over who could make the biggest fire, they started thinking about what fire meant. Not in a science way, in a soul way. Because once you've invented civilization, plumbing, and slightly cleaner diets, you eventually start asking, why am I here? And history, being the world's longest therapy session, tried to answer that, badly. Let's start somewhere familiar. Greece. The philosophers, those sleepy-eyed geniuses with too much free time, began staring at candles and asking whether fire was a spirit. Heraclitus, who was probably one of those guys you avoid at a symposium, claimed the universe was made of fire. Everything, he said, burns. The soul, the stars, the cities, all flickering, all changing. And if that sounds poetic, it's because it is. It also makes you realize humanity has been overthinking heat sources for about 2,500 years. Heraclitus wasn't alone. Across the sea, the Persians already had their sacred flames, eternal fires tended by priests of Zoroaster. To them, fire wasn't just energy, it was purity, truth itself,
a visible form of the divine. Which sounds lovely until you realize people literally went to war over whose fire was holier. Humanity won, irony 1,000. But here's where it gets more interesting. The idea of inner fire, the spark of life, didn't stay in temples. It moved into medicine, philosophy, even alchemy. Medieval thinkers believed every living being had a vital flame inside them, a warm, divine flicker keeping the body alive. When you died, the flame went out. That was it. No poetry, no mystery, just poof. The early doctors, bless them, thought this literal inner heat was measurable. If you were ill, maybe your internal fire was too weak. If you were angry, maybe it was burning too bright. And so they prescribed things like leeches, cold baths, or bloodletting. Basically, medieval attempts at turning it on and off again. Meanwhile, in monasteries across Europe, monks were writing quietly by candlelight. For them, fire meant devotion, illumination, a divine light of understanding. Imagine being one of them, bent over parchment, ink-stained fingers trembling, your only company the soft hiss of tallow candles. That gentle flame became the symbol of enlightenment, literally the root of the word illumination. Then came the mystics. Oh, the mystics loved fire. They saw it everywhere, in visions, in prayers, in ecstatic trances. St. John of the Cross wrote about the living flame of love, describing the soul's longing for God as a fire that consumes without destroying, which, depending on your experience, sounds like either a spiritual revelation or an unhealthy relationship metaphor. And yet, all these people, from philosophers to monks, were circling the same idea, that something burns quietly within us, something that drives us to create, destroy, dream, and rebuild. Let's drift east again, to India. Long before Europe was arguing about divine candles, Hindu texts described Agni, the fire god, not as a destroyer, but as a messenger between mortals and gods. Every ritual flame was a direct call to heaven. Every offering burned became a whisper to eternity. The Upanishads even said the fire within humans was the same as the cosmic fire of creation, Atman reflecting Brahman. Basically, the spark inside you is the same one that started the universe. No pressure. And that belief, that inner flame, kept flickering across centuries. The Buddhists spoke of enlightenment as awakening, a spark of understanding that burned away illusion. The Chinese saw fire as one of the 5 elements, a balance of warmth, emotion, and transformation. And if you've ever had a night where your brain refuses to shut off, well, maybe that's the same ancient fire refusing to dim. But then came the Renaissance, the age of pretty paintings and bad hygiene. Fire left the temples and found its way into art, literature, and occasionally, disastrous chemistry experiments. The alchemists believed that if they could understand fire, they could understand life. Some even thought it could turn lead into gold, or grant immortality. Spoiler, it didn't. What it did do was set a lot of basements on fire. Still, their obsession left behind something profound. The metaphor that transformation, whether metal or human, requires heat, that maybe we only change when things get uncomfortable. And here's where the story starts folding back on itself, because as humans learned more about science, we didn't abandon the metaphor, we upgraded it. In the Enlightenment, philosophers started talking about the light of reason. Entire revolutions were sparked, literally sparked, by the idea that knowledge could burn away ignorance. The French, never subtle, even called their intellectuals les lumières, the lights. But the more we chased that light, the more it consumed us. Factories roared, empires flared, and humanity, with its brilliant, restless energy, became addicted to burning. Coal, oil, forests, time. It didn't matter. If it could make us brighter, faster, or richer, we lit it up. And maybe that's the quiet tragedy of the ember within us. It gives warmth, yes. It creates, yes. But it never knows when to stop. Even now, as you listen, maybe in a dark room, screen flickering softly, you're surrounded by tiny artificial flames. Every pixel, every light, a descendant of that first ember. You carry it in your devices, in your neurons, in your heartbeat. It's not myth anymore. It's biology, technology, memory, all glowing together in the night. So, maybe Erathon, that old wanderer of flame, never vanished. Maybe he just moved inside us, became thought, became imagination. Every time you feel inspired, angry, or alive, that's him, still teaching humans how to burn beautifully without turning everything to ash. In the end, the ember within us isn't about destruction. It's about persistence. It's the small voice that whispers, "Try again," even when the world feels cold. It's the warmth of art, love, curiosity, the things that survive when everything else collapses. So tonight, as the lights dim and your eyes grow heavy, remember this. The fire doesn't end at the hearth, or in the stars, or even in the myths. It's here, in you, still dreaming.
Hey again, traveler. If you're still here, you're either asleep or you've decided to outlast the gods themselves. Either way, welcome back. Let's drift a little higher tonight, above the mortal world, into the quiet halls where gods once walked and, in their own divine way, forgot how to rest. Because here's the thing. For beings who could bend time, command thunder, and sculpt galaxies, the gods were surprisingly bad at self-care. They didn't eat much, didn't sleep, barely took a day off. You could call them celestial workaholics, eternal beings running on divine burnout. And honestly, it's kind of funny. Humanity looked up at the stars, saw chaos, lightning, famine, and thought, yeah, someone's definitely managing that. So they invented gods, and then imagined them as bigger, moodier versions of themselves. A cosmic management team that never clocked out. But tonight's story isn't about their grandeur. It's about what happens when immortality gets tired, when divinity itself forgets how to dream. Let's start, as many stories do, with Zeus, the king of gods, wielder of thunder, notorious for being unable to keep his toga on. You'd think someone who ruled the sky could take a nap once in a while, but no. Zeus lived on high alert, paranoid, overworked, eternally caffeinated on lightning. He had to be, because the universe, according to ancient myth, wasn't peaceful management. It was crisis control. Every day, he worried about rebellion, monsters, prophecies, or worse, paperwork from Olympus's divine council. And you can almost imagine it. Zeus pacing the marble halls, eyes bloodshot from millennia without sleep, muttering about Prometheus's latest stunt or Hera's new plan for vengeance. He'd throw another thunderbolt, shout at the clouds, and call it leadership. But here's the irony. The more powerful he became, the less rest he allowed himself.
He couldn't trust anyone else to keep the cosmos running. A true micromanager. So he stayed awake for centuries, watching, waiting, forgetting what quiet even sounded like. And maybe that's what the Greeks were trying to tell us, that even gods aren't immune to exhaustion. Power demands vigilance. Eternal vigilance erases peace. Now, contrast that with Hera, his wife, queen of heaven, patron of marriage, and possibly the only deity to hold a lifelong grudge as a hobby. Hera didn't sleep much either, not because of cosmic duty, but because she was angry, eternally. She had insomnia powered by divine spite. Every time Zeus cheated, which, let's be honest, was roughly every Tuesday, Hera plotted, and probably wrote angry celestial diary entries that glowed in the dark. Her dreams were filled with revenge fantasies and divine paperwork, curses, storms, metamorphoses. She didn't rest. She simmered, like a candle that refuses to die out no matter how much smoke fills the room. And maybe in a strange way, Hera's insomnia became a metaphor for every mortal heart that couldn't let go, for the pain of remembering when you should forget, for being the eternal insomniac of emotion. Now, if you think the Greeks were dramatic, let's drift north to Asgard. The gods of Asgard, those beautiful, doomed warriors who laughed in the face of fate and ignored every warning sign like it was a cosmic hobby. Odin, the All-Father, the Wanderer, was the god who traded his eye for knowledge. Not metaphorically, he literally plucked it out and dropped it into Mir's well because he couldn't stand not knowing everything. Which, let's be honest, is the divine equivalent of staying up until 4 a.m. reading Wikipedia articles about your own existential dread. Odin didn't sleep much either. How could he? He'd seen the end of the world, Ragnarok. He knew every dream was just a countdown to apocalypse. So he kept moving, wandering through realms, collecting wisdom, hoarding runes, whispering into the ears of poets and kings, always searching, never resting. And when he finally sat on his throne, overlooking the world, 2 ravens perched on his shoulders, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory. His insomnia made flesh. His thoughts and memories literally never left him alone. And that's the curse of knowledge. Once you see too much, sleep becomes impossible. Maybe Odin's insomnia wasn't divine duty. Maybe it was guilt. Watching mortals struggle, knowing their fate, and being powerless to change it. Immortality without comfort. Let's glide eastward again, to Egypt, land of golden gods and eternal sand. There, the sun itself was divine, Ra, the eternal traveler. Every day, Ra rose over the world, bringing light and life. And every night, he descended into the underworld, fighting serpents of chaos, just to rise again at dawn. Which, if you think about it, means even the sun god didn't sleep. His whole existence was one long commute. Daylight shift, night shift, repeat, forever. The universe's most exhausting job. Imagine that. Being light itself, yet never resting in darkness. To burn endlessly without pause. Even Ra, the god of radiance, must have grown tired of shining. Because what is light without shadow? What is immortality
without the soft relief of dreaming. And so, in Egyptian myth, sleep became symbolic of death, but also renewal. Each night Rod died, swallowed by darkness, only to be reborn. Maybe that's what the ancients understood better than us, that sleep, even for gods, wasn't weakness, it was balance, the pause between breaths that keeps the fire alive. Let's take a quieter step now, to the east, to the old lands of Japan. There the gods weren't towering sky rulers or immortal managers. They were spirits in everything. A stone, a river, a whisper of wind through bamboo. But even among them, some forgot how to rest. Take Amaterasu, the sun goddess. Once, after a divine argument, the details are blurry, but it involved her chaotic brother, Susanoo, destroying her rice fields. She locked herself in a cave. The world plunged into darkness. The other gods panicked. And what did they do? They didn't force her out. They didn't fight her. They simply created joy outside her cave. Dancing, laughter, reflection. They made the world alive again until curiosity drew her out, gentle as dawn. That story always feels quietly human. Sometimes we don't need to be woken with thunder. We just need a reason to smile again, a reason to return to the light. Amaterasu's retreat wasn't weakness. It was rest. Cosmic burnout, treated with kindness. And speaking of burnout, we can't forget the Hindu pantheon. The gods there are vast, layered, cyclical. They destroy, create, preserve, and repeat an endless loop of divine action. Take Brahma, the creator. He builds the universe, fills it with life, and then, exhausted, watches it dissolve again. 1 billion years for us, a single day for him. When the universe sleeps, Brahma sleeps. When it wakes, he wakes. He literally dreams the world into being. That might be the most peaceful concept ever invented, that existence itself is a god's dream. We're not divine punishment or cosmic accident. We're imagination mid-slumber. But yet, not all divine sleep is calm. Shiva, the destroyer, sleeps in
Deep meditation, a trance so vast that if he ever truly wakes, creation ends. His rest isn't peace, it's restraint, the silence before the final exhale. So even among gods, sleep becomes complicated. Too little, and you lose yourself to fury. Too much, and you dissolve the universe. So what do all these sleepless gods tell us? Maybe that divinity isn't freedom, it's pressure, the weight of eternity without the comfort of ending. Mortals envy gods because they never die, but maybe gods envy mortals because we get to rest, to forget, to stop burning for a little while. And maybe that's the heart of myth. Not glory, not power, but fatigue. The universal ache of existence trying to keep itself together. Because in the end, the gods weren't that different from us. They loved, fought, made mistakes, couldn't communicate, held grudges, forgot anniversaries, overworked themselves, and occasionally destroyed entire cities over minor emotional inconveniences. Relatable. But here's where things start to blur, because if mortals invented gods in their image, maybe all these sleepless, restless deities were just reflections, mirrors of our own anxiety about purpose and rest. Think about it.
the ancient world had no electricity, no caffeine, no social media. Yet somehow, even then, humans imagined insomnia on a cosmic scale. The fear of stillness, so powerful, it had to be written into the stars. Maybe that's why myths endure. Because they whisper what we can't say outright. That being alive is exhausting. That even eternity gets lonely sometimes. So if the gods forgot how to sleep, maybe we can forgive ourselves for being tired too. You don't need to conquer worlds or command thunder. You don't need to fix everything before sunrise. Even the most powerful beings in every myth, they all stumbled, burned out, took millennia to learn rest. And you can just breathe. Close your eyes. Let the universe run without you for a while. It's been doing that since the first Ember dreamed of becoming the sun. Because maybe, just maybe, sleep isn't the absence of fire. It's the moment the flame curls inward, rests, and remembers why it burns.
He again, wanderer. Still here? Good. Let's keep drifting, quietly, back into the emberlight. Because we've reached the point where fire stopped being just warmth and became memory. You see, when Erathon's flames spread across the lands, they didn't just light hearths, they lit minds. Every story told around a fire carried his name, even if no one remembered saying it. The flicker of a candle in a temple, the forge of a village blacksmith, the spark between two lovers huddled from warmth, all whispered his forgotten language. And in those quiet moments, people began to shape memory into ritual. The flick of the wrist while lighting a lamp, the bow before the flame, the hush before the spark catches. None of it written, but all of it remembered. Over time, fire became more than a tool. It became a witness. It watched everything. The rise of kings, the fall of empires, the birth of belief. It saw the first cities grow fat and loud, their temples rising like promises. And in every corner of those stone walls, someone still tended the flame, like a soft apology to something older than gods. But the strangest thing? The priests began to claim the fire. They built altars, burned incense, and declared it sacred, which, to be fair, it probably was, though not in the way they thought. Because if Erathon had still been walking among them, he would have smirked at their rituals and said, "You're worshipping the smoke, not the spark." Still, humans love symbols, and so the fire that once meant survival became religion. The ember that dreamed of freedom became chained to ceremony. And yet, it endured, always flickering beneath the rules, waiting for someone to remember the story behind the warmth. Let's drift a bit further, to a time when kingdoms began to burn themselves, quite literally. Cities made of wood and ambition, palaces lined with tapestries, libraries with shelves of parchment, all of it fuel. One lightning strike, one careless candle, and centuries of civilization vanished into ash. Funny, isn't it? The same gift that saved us could also erase us. Fire gave birth to creation and became the hand of destruction. Maybe Erathon foresaw that. Maybe that's why he disappeared when he did, before humanity could turn warmth into weapon. Yet even as the great fires raged, Rome burning, London choking under its own smoke, Alexandria watching her knowledge go up in flames, people still gathered by the smaller ones, the humble ones. A single flame in a hearth, a candle beside a bed, a torch guiding a lost traveler. Those were the true temples of Erathon, the small, stubborn flames that refused to be swallowed by darkness. And through it all, stories kept breathing. Each generation shaped the fire's myth differently, as a god, a trickster, a thief, or a teacher. In one land, he was Prometheus, chained for giving light to mortals. In another, he was Agni, the divine messenger between man and the heavens. In the cold north, he was Logi, flame itself, untouchable and eternal. Different names, same ember. It's almost poetic, isn't it? how humanity kept forgetting him, yet never stopped telling his story. Like a dream you half remember after waking. You can't recall the words, but the warmth lingers. Some philosophers even wrote that fire was the soul of the world, that everything living carried a spark from the original flame. Plants, animals, humans, all burning in slow motion. Life itself as a kind of quiet combustion. A poetic thought, but perhaps not so far from truth. After all, every heartbeat is heat, every breath a tiny exchange of flame. And so Erathon's gift didn't just survive, it became us. But here's where it gets interesting. In later centuries, when science began replacing superstition, people tried to explain fire, to capture it in formulas, label it with Latin, measure its temperature, its color, its hunger. They called it oxidation, energy, reaction. Beautiful, sterile words. Yet even the scientists couldn't fully let go of its mystery. They spoke of inner fires, ignition points, and flame tests, language that still echoed the poetry of myth. It's as though no matter how rational we become, we still sense something divine in the flicker of light in the dark. And maybe that's the point. Maybe fire was never meant to be explained, only remembered. Because if you stare into a flame long enough, you realize it doesn't really stay still. It moves, breathes, dances, and dies over and over in a rhythm that feels oddly familiar, almost human. So perhaps Erathon didn't vanish into legend at all. Perhaps he's still here, in every match struck, every stove lit, every candle burning beside a lonely desk at midnight. Let's linger here a bit. Feel the warmth against the silence. Imagine the first human, shivering in a cave, watching flame curl upward like a living thing. Imagine their wonder, their fear, their awe. That moment changed everything. It made us builders, dreamers, storytellers. The ember that dreamed became the world that remembers. And somewhere far beyond time, maybe Erathon smiles. Not as a god or a myth, but as the quiet flicker at the heart of every human dream. The night deepens now. The story breathes slower, but the flame still whispers. It always does.